Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It is so wonderful to be back here again. It's Wednesday and it is Benivo Bites time, and we've got people coming in from all over the world. I'm so excited. I'm just seeing some of these names. People come from Amal from Bangalore. We got Mahit also from India. We've got people from the US. We've got people from Europe. We've got Chris from Long Island. And we've got such an amazing show that we're going to be talking to you about today. We are talking about cybersecurity. I mean, that is such a huge issue that, you know, if we'd gone back a few years ago, people would be saying, well, what is cybersecurity? But cybersecurity is, we at Benivo believe, is probably the biggest issue that has not yet been properly addressed in our industry. And it is a particularly important issue for us because we in global mobility probably handle more personal data than any other function within our companies and even within our HR functions. One only has to spend a moment thinking about the amount of personal data that we're dealing with in terms of the people, our employees, their partners, their children, their properties, their possessions. We've got so much personal data, and yet we haven't really been addressing cybersecurity perhaps as much as we should have done. And we're going to get into that. This is going to be a two-part show. I'm hesitating slightly because there's actually a 2.5-part show, and let me explain it a little bit. First of all, and you're already doing it, you know, join the conversation, write in the comments box, tell us who you are, where you are, as we go through. If you've got questions, ask questions. So let's get this to be as interactive as possible. So today we're going to be talking, as I said, about cybersecurity in the global mobility supply chain. So that's today. And then next week, we're changing subject. Next week, we have got the big reveal. Now, this is really, really exciting. As everybody knows, back in December, we revealed who were nominated as the top 250 global mobility professionals in the world. Well, on the 19th of January, we're going to reveal who topped the poll, who had the most nominations of anybody in the global mobility industry. And we will be live and we will be discussing the results of the poll, and we will have that very special mystery guest. So if you want to find out who topped, who got the most nominations, I suppose you could say who is the most admired global mobility professional in the world, certainly the person who got the most nominations, then join us on the 19th of January. And then the week after that, on the 26th of January, we're going to go back to the subject of cybersecurity. As I said, this is a two-parter. In today's session, we're going to be explaining what cybersecurity is, what the issues are. And then on the 26th of January, we're going to start talking about some of the solutions. We've also got another special event, and this is actually on the 10th of February, and this is one to put in your diary. Now, I'm afraid that this is corporate only. On the 10th of February, we're going to be announcing our very own cybersecurity solution. Now, in the interest of security, well, some things you keep secure. Normally, we are completely transparent, but security does rather imply being secure. So we're going to have a separate secure solution, which we're going to be really revealing on the 10th of February. So we've got some wonderful sessions coming up over the next few weeks. On the show today, I'm delighted to say that we've got the CEO of a cybersecurity company, Ryan McKamie, who's going to be telling us all about cybersecurity and really explaining things. We've also got both Nitzan Yudan and Gohar from Benivo, who are going to be talking about cybersecurity. And indeed, we've got one of our very special change makers joining us. And of course, as ever, we've got Julia Onslow-Cole talking to us about immigration. But before we get into that, every week, we just try and do a little bit of breaking news. So let's see what is this week's breaking news. What's been happening in the wonderful world of global mobility? So that's this week's news. Hopefully you found out something, a bit, people being promoted, people, new jobs, all exciting news. And congratulations to everybody who has been promoted or who's had a new job or any other news. And if you've got news you want to share, then do message it through to me and we'll try and make sure we get it onto the show in another week. By the way, not only is this a lot of fun, this show, I hope you will find it a lot of fun, but of course you also get credits. So if you need credits from ERC for your GMS or CRP, or from HRCI or from SHRM, these are the credits. I leave it up there now. I'll put it up again towards the end of the show. And many, many thanks to everybody at ERC for giving us the credits, and also to our good friends at Rocket Mortgage, who've helped us get the credits from HRCI and indeed from SHRM. So thanks everybody for that. So let's move swiftly on. Let's get into the meat of the show. And we've got loads of really, really interesting news. So let's go on straight on and talk about immigration. And we'll bring the one and only, the legend, Julia Onslow-Cole, onto the show.
Hi, Brian.
How are you doing?
Very well, thanks.
Good. Now, there's only one story out there, isn't there, at the moment in the world of visas, immigrations. There's so many learnings from it. So
yes,
I'm guessing we might be starting down under?
I think so, yes. So I thought we would start today just talking about Djokovic's case. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to Teresa Liu, who is our partner in charge of Australia, who spoke to me ridiculously early her time, last night, our time, about the case. And I think really just highlights what we've been saying for several weeks now about the complexities of the visa rules, and particularly in Australia, because you have the federal layer, and that's when enter Australia. You have the federal layer, and then you have the rules in the particular state and the territory. Now, the case on Monday, as we know, the Home Affairs Minister, the Australian Home Affairs Minister, consented to the Federal Circuit Court quashing the decision that had been made to cancel Djokovic's visa, and they agreed to pay his legal costs. But the case technically, it was all about the fact that he didn't have a fair process. I think if you remember, he actually arrived at the airport in Melbourne in just past midnight, and he was questioned for several hours. And his visa was refused in the end at about 5:20 a.m. So, the judge said, well, that really wasn't a fair process because, he couldn't really contact his advisors at that time in the morning. So the ruling wasn't about whether or not he had medical exemption or anything. It was really just to do with the process. And he would say that, he was entitled to an exemption because he'd been vaccinated. And the government will probably say that in certain of the rules, that wouldn't be good enough. It has to be a sort of medical reason for not having a vaccine. And they've actually clarified that now on the website for new travellers. But I think the big question out there is what will the government do? And, will it actually remake their decision? Obviously, it has the power to do that. And as you know, there is ongoing discussions and inconsistencies. But I think a point to highlight about this, apart from the fact that the situation is so very, very complicated, and that's, this layer of federal and then state, which often happens in other countries. So it just really highlights that. But also, I mean, if he was to be deported, or if anyone is to be deported, it is pretty serious from an immigration perspective. You're not actually allowed back into that country. In Australia, it would be 3 years unless there was a hugely compassionate and compelling reason. And so it just shows you the sort of downside of, not getting the rules right. So just sort of moving on from there, from Djokovic's case, thanking Scott Lieb, who's our knowledge manager, but looking at where are we on vaccine passports? Because obviously, what would be ideal for global travelers is to now have some sort of global document that all governments accepted, that you could just show your visas. So where are we on this? And the Biden administration's been looking at it, so has the European Union. But there's a number of problems that are being encountered about this idea of having a sort of global vaccine passport. And one of the many problems is, what do you accept as a acceptable vaccine? And every country is different. Some might say that the Sputnik vaccine in Moscow from Russia wouldn't be acceptable. In China, they would like you to have their vaccine. Then there's data privacy concerns. There's questions about, potential discrimination because, what happens to those that are unable to have vaccines. And also there's this question about the ability to trace people, because until it's absolutely proven that immunized individuals can't affect others, there will be that desire to track people. And that, again, is very controversial. So the main actors who've created vaccine passports are private travel companies, international organizations, and individual governments. And the most popular for the private travel provider is Verifly, which I think a lot of people who say live in the UK will have used. And the most popular, created by an international organization, is the Common Pass, the IATA Travel Pass, and the AOK Pass. And individual country governments have also developed some systems. So Fragaman did a survey in October of last year, and out of 161 countries, 56 required people to use a digital health passport. Now, finally, I'm just going to talk about fraud because, that's a really interesting topic that we're talking about today, is cybersecurity. But there has been an enormous rise in vaccine passport and COVID test fraud. And you see everywhere offers for fake vaccine passports. And usually you see these emerging on the black market when countries are really tightening up. So what happened in France is in July, they're saying, well, people going to leisure events and cultural venues have to show their vaccination status. And then we saw these passports, vaccine passports, going on the black market for about 350 euros. And there's a very interesting discussion that's being had now in the French Parliament, and I actually saw some papers on it this week, saying on the one hand, the idea being floated is that if you're caught using a fraudulent document, you should have like a 1,000 to 75,000 euro fine and up to 5 years in prison. But one of the ministers was saying, no, we should just make the person have the vaccine. So, and if they agree to have the vaccine, then we just drop their charges. So it's a very interesting ongoing debate. Now, fake certificates and vaccine passports are really easy to find. At first, they were all on the dark web, but now you can see them on Facebook groups and you can see them on WhatsApp groups. And this shift to messenger platforms indicates that the sellers are targeting very unsophisticated buyers, you know, those buyers that would find it very difficult to maneuver around the dark web. And those buyers are much less able to spot a scam. I do remember, I must say, that one of my daughters, it's quite funny, applied for a fake driving license. I shouldn't really say this, but when she was young, she's desperate.
No one's watching, Julie. It's just you and me. This isn't going out on the internet. Don't worry.
And her maths was so bad that she applied for it for a year younger than she was. So, you know, I did actually intercept the post and found this fake document, but it's quite funny because she's actually, you know, it was actually a year younger than she really, really was. Anyway, so yesterday there was a report in the UK, a CEO of a waste disposal company saying that criminal gangs were actually sifting through rubbish bins in the UK, and they were actually giving bribes to his workers to take used lateral flow tests. And these used lateral flow tests were being used to sort of fool people for employers, and used either way. So if you fancied a week off work, you could take a positive one, or if you wanted to, you know, get into a venue, you could take a negative one. And then also yesterday, there were reports of border officials in Canada and US seizing hundreds of fake vaccine certificates. And if you actually look, they are being sold as little as $150 US. So, Elisa Ketty is just saying that the government has implemented now some fines in France. So thank you for that, Elisa, and Fiona, for your comments. But really, just in summary, I think it's becoming, you know, as it's becoming more critical for people to need these vaccine passports for travel and for entering into venue, we're just going to see, you know, an enormous rise in fraud. And I suppose it's part of the fraud that employers are going to be subjected to, you know, as we move on to talk about cybersecurity.
Absolutely. There does seem to be an awful lot of potential for fraud, and the systems are very lax. Julia, that's absolutely fascinating update from you, and everyone is going to be watching the Djokovic case very, very carefully. What was the line I heard? He may be the first person to lose a Grand Slam having missed only 2 shots, as they say. Anyway, moving on, let's give it up to Julia. Let's have lots of hearts and applause and hit those buttons, and we'll say goodbye to Julia. But we're going to bring on this week's very special change maker who is helping do good for the global mobility industry. And I'm delighted to, as we say goodbye to Julia, I'm delighted to welcome Anna Monsalva, who'll be talking to us about the charitable work that she is doing.
Brian, how are you?
For joining us. Where are you today?
I'm in Houston.
Cool. Is it cool?
It's a little bit cool for Houston standards, I might say. I'm sure that my colleagues from the Northeast would laugh, you know, if I tell them the temperature, but it is a little bit chilly for us.
Okay. And tell us, before we get on to the charity, just tell us a bit about yourself, because you were with BP, is that right?
Yes. I worked for BP for several years. I now kind of, looking for my next stage. I had several years of experience with global mobility, and I definitely enjoy the industry. That's one of the reasons why I, keep coming to this show every week to stay connected with my fellow peers, and just looking for the new career stage in 2022.
Cool. Well, all the best for 2022. But you're one of our wonderful change makers. You've got a passion for technology, but also you've got a charitable passion. So tell us a bit about your charity, your chosen charity.
Yes, well, Brian, last year when I was approached by Benivo to become part of this fantastic group of change makers, I started kind of looking around for one charity that would really, really kind of speak to my heart. And I found Women for Women International to be the one. And the reason I chose it was because I am definitely passionate about, support for women, empowering women in all levels of society and circles in the world. And Women for Women International had a beautiful mission to support women in war or conflict zones. They are actively working in 8 different nations. And basically what they do is they have this beautiful program where, their principle is stronger women, stronger nations, where they put together groups of 25 women working together and receiving training and skills on how to become change agents. So it's a beautiful program because they actually take them out of the isolation of the conflict that they have been exposed to. And instead of, continuing to be the victims of their situation, they actually become agents, for good change, not only for their own lives, but for the lives of their communities. So the organization support them with a financial contribution throughout the year, which is the length of this initial program, so that they can actually attend classes, be able to socialize with other women, and create very strong networks that afterwards allow them to work together and move forward with, some financial assistance, with additional vocational training, and give them the ability to create networks so that they can actually support themselves going forward.
Okay, that's just amazing. I mean, it's obviously an amazing charity, and it's great to see that, and it's great for, that you're supporting them, and we're helping you. Well, you're supporting us, and we're helping to support them on your behalf. Just a message out there to everybody in LinkedIn world is that if you would like to join us as a Benivo change maker, and I'm afraid this is only open to corporates, then do get in contact either with me or with Nitsan or with our new producer Tali. Then do sort of make contact, and we will support pretty much any charity that you want us to support on your behalf. So do let us know. But meanwhile, we're going to say goodbye to you, Anna. So please, everybody, give up the hearts, hit the like, hit the applause. We'll say goodbye to Anna, and we're going to move on to the section of our show, the main section of the show, when we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. And we've got an amazing roster of guests for you now. So everybody, hit those buttons, hit the likes, hit the hearts, hit the applause. Let's say goodbye to Anna, and let's join Ryan, Gohar, and Nitsan as we start talking about cybersecurity in global mobility. Hey guys, hey, this is such a big big subject. I'm super excited to have you all here today. Ryan, I'm going to start with you because many in the audience, hopefully everybody in the audience, has heard of Benivo by now, but they may not know Certus Cybersecurity. So tell us a bit about yourself and what your company does.
Sure, happy to. And thanks for having me, Brian. My name is Ryan McKamie. I lead a company called Certus Cybersecurity. We're a provider of product security services, including penetration testing, code review, threat modeling, range of services that are designed to help companies secure digital products that they might be building. We provide these services for both very large corporations and financial institutions, as well as fast-growing companies at smaller scales, and that's our business in a nutshell.
Okay, and Nitsan, I mean, why is cybersecurity so relevant to the global mobility industry specifically?
I think, as you said in the introduction, we hold a lot of valuable information of the employees and often of executive employees. And the challenge in our industry is that it's both a global industry and a local industry. What does it mean? It's global because we are looking for global solutions, but then the delivery is local. So we have network of vendors that manage vendor and so forth. The downstream vendors go there. And that means that they all have access to that personal data and the personal information, which means that if something would go wrong, it goes all the way back to the corporate who will need to handle the impact of that and need to communicate it back to the employee and basically come to this senior executive and just tell them, oh, I'm sorry, your data has been exposed and it's now in the darknet, which is a conversation that none of us would like to have.
So you could be X corporation, a major Fortune 500 or FTSE 100 corporation. You're then using, say, I know, a very reputable, well-known RMC, but then you're going down the supply chain. There might be a DSP, there might be a pet transportation company, there might be a housing company, anywhere down that supply chain, and there could be a data breach, a long way down the supply chain, but it's still affecting your employees. Is that the issue that we're looking at here?
Absolutely, yes. That's definitely one of the biggest issues because of the way that our industry is structured, right? That information will flow and get into smaller and smaller vendors who are the local vendors who simply cannot manage the data as they should, because it's not from bad intention. It's just the level of investment that is required to achieve the quality that Ryan will talk about and Gohar will talk about in terms of information security is a massive investment, and a small business who run that locally just cannot do that, and that's a massive challenge that we have in our industry. Okay,
so Ryan, if I just turn to you, I mean, let's just maybe just define terms a little bit and make sure we understand what we're talking about, because we'll go dive into this over the next few weeks. But let's start at the top. What is cybersecurity? What is information security? And what is data privacy? What do these terms mean?
Sure, Brian. So information security is really about protecting information and information systems from unauthorized access, disclosure, alteration, in order to provide confidentiality, availability, and integrity. And that's very important for businesses who need to protect as part of their mission and as part of their commercial objectives, need to be thinking about how to protect the privacy of customer data, the personally identifiable information of their employees or individual or customers, as well as intellectual property or source code that they might have. Those are all. That's broadly how I would define those topics.
Okay, and Nitsan, as I understand it, we've actually launched a survey into cybersecurity. Do you want to tell us a bit about what we're doing?
Yes, so we are doing a benchmarking survey, and that's open for corporate and for vendor to a little bit understand, and of course then communicate it back in in the next show of what are the perceptions of cybersecurity in the industry. What's the impact? We've seen about 50 responses so far. We can already see about 40% of companies reporting they experienced a data breach in their supply chain, and some of the vendors kind of sharing a little bit their view on that, what's important, what's the impact. And I think that will give us as an industry a few tools to make sure we improve that, because that's really what we want to ensure. We want to help corporate improve their information security and cybersecurity, but also to help the vendors, because we all need to work on that as an ecosystem in order to deliver the value and really protect the data and make sure we protect the corporate and the employees. So I see that as a community effort, and hopefully with that survey we will be able to uncover some of the challenges and then work with Ryan and Gohar next show to kind of find solutions.
Absolutely. So we're going to start coming to the solutions next. We want to sort of raise the issue and make sure people are understanding it. And we've talked about financial implications and reputational implications, and we'll get into those in a moment. But actually, I've got a question for the audience. I want to ask the audience this question, which is, how embarrassing would it be for you personally if you found there was a data breach in your company or in your supply chain? We're talking about in global mobility. How embarrassing would it be? And these are the choices that I'll give you. It's not an issue. It's moderately embarrassing. It's hugely embarrassing. Or I could lose my job if one of the vendors I was looking after had a supply chain and one of my assignees, one of the vendors I was looking after had a data breach, and one of my assignees found that their data had been breached. So let us know what you think. How embarrassing would a data breach be for you personally if within global mobility function there was some data breach either in your company or down your supply chain? And whilst we're waiting for people's comments to come in on that, and we'll go back to that in a moment, but do keep your comments coming in the audience. I'll just go back to Ryan and just say, well, we've talked about cybersecurity, but we're talking about the supply chain. What is supply chain cybersecurity?
Sure. So organizations often leverage the services or products or code from vendors or suppliers, and that especially a large organization might have an ecosystem of the suppliers that it leverages. And with those suppliers, they may have a trusted relationship. They may consume software produced by those suppliers. And with that comes a need to validate the security posture of any third-party code, validate that trusted relationships aren't introducing security risks for an organization. And so really it becomes an issue that is important for both vendors and organizations which engage or have their products consumed by larger organizations, as well as for those enterprises who need to manage risk across an ecosystem of suppliers. So that's really what we're talking about when we're discussing supply chain security. And a supply chain attack is one where a supplier is compromised, and the attacker leverages that compromise in order to basically attack or compromise an organization with whom that supplier has a trusted relationship, ultimately targeting that organization's sensitive data, be it PII, intellectual property, code. There can be many things.
Yeah, and I mean, Priya made this comment. She said, in answer to my question, how embarrassing would a data breach be for you? Hugely embarrassing. Depending on the cause of the breach, heads could roll or contracts terminated. So, I mean, that's, it's not just embarrassing personally. You could certainly find that. In fact, we did this as a LinkedIn poll. We asked this question on LinkedIn, and the answers were quite interesting. I mean, what we found was that 0% said it wouldn't be an issue. Only 5% said it would be moderately embarrassing. 56% said it would be hugely embarrassing, and 39% said I could lose my job. So in other words, 95% of the people who responded to the poll said it would be either hugely embarrassing or potentially career limiting if there was a data breach somewhere in global mobility. So this is not an issue I think we can hide away from. This is an issue which, heaven forbid, if it hits us, is going to be a very, very major concern. And that's sort of the next question I had, and maybe I've sort of preempted the answer here, but I'll start with you on this one, Nitzan, is why is it important? Why is cybersecurity so important?
I think it's complemented to what you just said, right? We see the impact of that is massive, and it's not a question of will it happen, it's a question of when. And in our industry, we see that a big number of companies are already reporting it, and the numbers of data breaches and security issues is only increasing. So it's a question of when, and the question is, what do we do today to manage that and to make sure we protect our organization, to make sure we take all the possible steps to stay ahead of the game, because cybersecurity is changing all the time. It's just something that dynamic, and we need to be proactive on manage that, and not just say, all right, if my company checked the direct vendors and everything was fine, then we are in good hands. That's not the reality. That's not what happens. And I think as an industry, we miss that, and we don't treat that as seriously as we should. And that's why we need to act it now. It's a question of time. It's not a question of whether it's going to happen or not.
Okay, and Gohar, I'm guessing from your point of view, you're always looking to do things to, maybe say a little bit about your role, but you're head of cybersecurity at Benivo. So maybe just say a little bit about, why is it important for us at Benivo?
Yeah, of course. I'm the head of development department in Benivo, and cybersecurity is under my team's responsibility, one of the responsibilities. And so we had a long way with it, especially last couple of years, because the world standards have raised, because the standards of the organizations are different and much higher now. We have our vendors, we have lots of vendors, and we need to, we are checking their security and making sure that their security level is enough and sufficient for us, but we ourselves are vendors for our clients as well. And we, especially recently, last 1-2 years especially, have realized that for being a good vendor, we need to meet the same standards as our clients, as our big clients that may have more resources, but we need to meet them. Otherwise, we can become the weakest link there, as if you have a vendor with lower security standards, as good as is your solution, as secure as it is, as secure as your infrastructure, and you don't have any weakest parts in your own solution, you, any case, have a higher risk of security breaches. So it is very important for us in Benivo to meet the security standards for us, and we've realized that being the weakest link is really something that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think if there's, one takeaway, that I'd want, both corporates and suppliers to bear in mind is the risk is with the weakest link. It is a supply chain, and it is a chain. And with any chain, it's the weakest link that causes the problem. So that's something we really need to understand. And a comment here coming in from Priya. One of the challenges we have faced in global mobility is when trying to get new contracts signed, as InfoSec teams are challenging the data security measures in place with suppliers. This makes it much harder to work with smaller service providers, even if they may be the better provider. It reflects how seriously organizations are taking the issue. And I know that's something, maybe Nitzan, you can speak to it, but I know that is something that we are going to be addressing in some of the upcoming shows, is, solutions for that weakest link problem.
Yes, absolutely. I think they raise a point Priya raised is spot on. In order to deliver on the requirement of information security and cybersecurity, it requires big investments, it requires development teams, it requires engaging with cybersecurity and experts to make sure we put it on top. And it's a big investment for a small company. And what we don't want to do is to create, to impact our supplier diversity. Right? If we only work with the world's largest organizations because they will only have the available cybersecurity, we are impacting supplier diversity. And that's what we, as part of the solutions we are launching, is the ability to work with smaller suppliers by letting us manage the cybersecurity and making sure we provide the value there. So kind of allowing the smaller companies to also benefit from working with large companies and allowing large companies meet their supplier diversity goals.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point here from Eric that I may actually challenge you. Now, Eric's a good friend of mine, so I feel a bit embarrassed about challenging. But Eric says level of embarrassment would depend on whether I contracted directly with the supplier that was breached, or whether it was a downstream supplier that my RMC contracted with, and the RMC had warranted to me and the company that they had security measures in place, and my company checked and approved these measures. I mean, I fully agree with you, Eric, but I think nonetheless, I think even if it had been warranted, and sometimes some of the checks that are happening, and I've seen happening, are, to be honest, fairly loose. I'd say, or maybe Nitzan or Gohar can talk about that a bit more. But if there was nonetheless, even though we'd done the work, there was something that happened down the supply chain, and my sort of C-suite executives' data had been leaked out, I think, I might say, well, actually, it's not me. It was down there. It was the pet transportation company or something down the supply chain. But nonetheless, I think that that there would be a lot of, material hitting the fan. Let's just talk about it, because it's not just about reputational. We've talked a bit about reputational implications. There's also financial implications. And I know there have been, we're not going to name names, but there have been a number of major corporations that have been fined tens, and in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars for data breaches. But Ryan and Nitzan, maybe you could just talk through what the financial implications are of a data breach, either in the corporate or indeed down the supply chain.
Sure. I think for organization of any size that suffers a data breach or some sort of security incident, the financial reputational consequences can be pretty significant. And so it's an event that organizations should be looking to proactively work to prevent by implementing the right security controls and maintaining an appropriate security posture. Now, for organizations that do suffer data breaches, I've seen those costs run into the millions for remediation, fines. There's a number of different costs that can come into play. Not to mention also potential risk of business interruption as well. So a number of considerations which in aggregate really should be driving organizations to take a very proactive approach towards implementing an effective security posture, looking to best practice standards, conducting tests and security assurance on their product development lifecycle, all with the goal of avoiding that sort of outcome.
And even in our industry, again, we're not going to name names, but even in our industry, I've seen or heard or read reports of data breaches at accounting firms, mobility firms, household goods firms, technology firms. I mean, it has happened throughout our industry and much broader. But Nitzan, maybe you could just say a bit about the level of fines. I mean, what is the potential risk of fines?
Yes, the risk is significant, right? This can get to a minimum of $20 million or 4% of global annual revenues. And there were already quite big and known fines that were applied for violation of cybersecurity and data privacy. That especially when the corporate didn't do everything that they could in order to avoid that. And we're talking about hundreds of millions of fines that created big financial challenges. Well, maybe for some of the organization, that's not that because of their size, but it's a meaningful number, and those fines haven't been applied. I think to address Eric's point, that's actually the problem in our industry. We think it's enough to assign someone else and they handle the problem for us. But actually, this will backfire because legally, not true that this will stand. There is a known case of a large airline company who claimed exactly the same, and the authorities said, still, that's your problem. You chose the vendors, the downstream vendor. It's all your responsibility, and hence they got the fine. And in addition, it's still the embarrassment coming back to the C-suite in the company and saying your information is on the darknet now because of a vendor who cares? So who cares what is the reason? It's important to solve those, and now there are solutions. And now that these solutions are available, it's time to make sure we take, as an industry, we take the action, all of us upgrading our information security to make sure we deliver on that.
Okay, and I mean, Eric's made the point there that the risk is that it may just push you to using larger corporates, larger suppliers in your supply chain where you think they can have their data security. The problem is that you can't always do that. You're using people. Even the largest companies subcontract out to smaller companies down the supply chain, and we're going to be talking in a later show about a solution. We're not, but I don't know, and we do have a solution. But I don't know if there's anything you can say at this stage. As Sandra Nitzan has said, we use a third-party security ratings company, and Sandra, I believe, is with New Compass, to assess supplier vulnerability and cyber hygiene. Some smaller or more remote suppliers are less sophisticated and sometimes don't meet our minimum requirements. Do you have any recommendations in this case?
Sure. One thing that I would recommend is there's a best practice standard which is geared towards organizations of all sizes and contains minimum best practice standards for the security industry. And that's the CIS controls, or Center for Internet Security Controls. It's a very good framework which have seen adopted in both very large organizations as well as smaller organizations. And in fact, that framework contains guidance on how smaller organizations can implement it and how they can right-size the framework for their context and smaller scale. So I would point to frameworks like that, as well as for organizations that are engaged with software development. There's a best practice standard or framework and community called OWASP. That's the Open Web Application Security Project, which puts out a lot of great guidance for organizations.
Okay, and a question's come in, and I'll push some of this towards you, Gohar. It said, what international certifications and standards does Benivo have to cover risk and cybersecurity issues? And maybe more broadly, if you could talk a bit about what we do with our own cybersecurity.
Yeah, actually, we're encountering the same problems, and we know that personal data wasn't protected well initially. There were lots of data breaches, personal data breaches that were mentioned before during the discussion, and we've come with our solution. It's not a single solution, but a couple of features, best practices, guides, and this is the combination, all of them. And the main concept is that we are protecting our data from everyone. This is a zero trust policy. We're protecting personal data from our employees, from our vendors. We are extending our solutions and policies to our clients and also to supplier chain network to not encounter the problems that are having, to lower the risk of data breaches by essential person by about 97%, and there is we won't go deep to the solution, but we are securing everything. We are trying to secure communication. We are building some guides for our for our vendors that don't meet the standards we need, and we are creating workaround features for these kind of vendors to not limit us by using their functionality, by leveraging the functionality they are providing to us, because we indeed need them, and not all the vendors are as technologically advanced. They not all are meet the standards we need, but we need the functionality. So we built a couple of innovative solutions along with guides and policies that allow us to eliminate the risk and to lower the risk for data breach.
Okay, and Nitsa, I know we're going to be releasing a solution for the industry at some point over the next few weeks. I don't know if you can sort of just give us a general steer. I know we're going to keeping it under wraps for the moment, but can you give us a few general thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think echoing what Gohar said, is a set of solution. It's not a one solution. It's looking into a few layers of protections, and we'll talk more on that concept of layer defense on the next show with Ryan and Gohar. And what we take there is that approach, and we see how can we help the vendors, the suppliers, even the smallest one, to make sure they have a state-of-the-art cybersecurity as good as ours, which is the one that passes all the corporate checks and all the corporate due diligence. So bringing it to be best-in-class solution by leveraging our technology solution. So corporates can actually choose any vendor on the market, even smaller vendors, work with support supplier diversity, and solve that huge risk, as Gohar said, reducing the impact of a data breach by 97%, something what we calculated with one of the corporates we work with on that, and in general, just protecting the data in a way that wasn't available before in our industry.
So going back to what, in fact, Eric just posted, he says, much better to have a cybersecurity solution that would allow a company to work with anyone they wish. And that's exactly what we're working on and will be releasing very shortly. So, I mean, yeah, so lots of questions coming. I mean, maybe actually I'll just ask you, what exactly is a data breach? I mean, Ryan, maybe just talk about exactly what a data breach is and why people do it, and let's just understand what's going on.
Sure. The data breach is a security incident which results in the basically disclosure or a compromise of sensitive information, be it personally identifiable information, be it intellectual property or other sensitive information that an adversary is able to walk off with or obtain unauthorized access to.
Okay, and why are companies doing it? Or is it companies? Why are hackers doing it?
Sure, I think attackers have a number of different motivations. Some of those motivations might be financial. There could be individuals who are disgruntled employees who are insider threat. There's what's called hacktivists who hack for political purposes against international organizations. There's kind of myriad rationales for why individuals seek access to information by hacking.
Okay, the question that's come through there is, how difficult is it for you to track the source?
Sure, I mean, I think it depends on the circumstance, but attribution is sometimes difficult. In the aftermath of a security incident or breach, I think the focus should be less on attribution and more on understanding what was the root cause in terms of where did the organization's security defenses fall short, and how can the organization shore up those defenses to prevent a similar attack in the future.
And one issue that, as we sort of move into our last sort of 6 or 7 minutes, I want to get to into maybe our last area is that we've talked about managing security, and many companies who are managing data security, they might send out an annual questionnaire or something. But I think one of the things you were saying to me when we were chatting earlier, Gohar, is that managing security is not an annual issue. It's something that should be done daily. So I wonder if you just talk about, what daily testing looks like for managing cybersecurity risk.
Actually, I will start from the beginning, Brian, because what we've done previously was GDPR was introduced, so we've meet the GDPR requirements so that we're compliant with it. Later, we've made an ISO 27001 certification with making sure that our security standards and our policies are high enough to meet the World Organization standards. We were doing regular penetration testing, security code reviews, and fixes as their feedback regularly. But at some point, we've realized that it is not enough to do security reviews and to work on security periodically. It should be done every day. It should become part of our daily work and part of the mindset. Security shouldn't be added at the end, but should be designed from the beginning for all the features, for all the tools that are built. Security should be built in, and that is how it should be part of our daily work and our mindset.
Okay, and I mean, you've used that phrase penetration testing. Explain to anybody that doesn't know, what exactly is penetration testing?
Penetration testing is an authorized imitation of attack on your system so that you can know your weakest points, potential security issues in advance, and you have the ability to fix them before being hacked.
Okay.
It's like an imitation of hacking.
Okay, so it's like hacking yourself, is it?
Yes, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, in terms of what can organizations do to improve their cybersecurity? And that organization might be a corporate, or indeed it might be somebody down the supply chain. What can people do to improve their cybersecurity? I mean, Ryan, do you want to sort of address that one?
Sure. I think Gohar hit on some of the key activities and focus areas that organizations should have. I think it starts with having the appropriate policies, which set out how the organization should treat and protect sensitive information, and then putting in place the processes and controls in order to ensure the enforcement of those policies across the organization with the appropriate coverage, tooling, and procedures, including the ones that Gohar mentioned, be it penetration testing, code reviews, all those activities that are geared into the product development lifecycle, as well as ensuring appropriate identity and access management, endpoint security, range of activities. I would encourage anyone who's curious about what they should be doing to refer to any of those best practice standards mentioned previously, including the CIS controls or other industry standard guidance to help organizations improve their security posture.
Okay, well, as we finish up the show, I'd like to bring on to join us our previous guests, Julie Onslow-Cole and Anna Monsalva. But also I'd like to bring on our producer. We've got a new producer who's joined Benivo, and this is going to be her first time actually on screen. So let's bring Tali, or Dr. Tali Gorin, on to the screen. And welcome to Benivo, Tali. You've been doing an amazing job backstage, and it's great to have you on the team. I know you've got a fascinating career story yourself, and I'm sure we'll get you one day on the show to be talking about your own career. How many countries have you lived in and worked in, Tali?
Oh, you should have warned me ahead of time.
Those are good.
Yeah, that's more than 15 for sure.
Okay. And we'll find out a lot more. But all that really remains now is to thank Anna for being one of our brilliant change makers, and all the best for 2022 for you and your career search. And thank you for all the work that you do. I should say the CPE credits are up there, and for anybody who wants their credit. Many thanks to you, Julia, for your wonderful as ever immigration update. We look forward to hearing more next week, and no doubt we will know what has happened with that, with Djokovic and that particular case. We'll know a lot more by next week. But that's one that I think everybody in our industry is watching with a professional eye. And of course, many thanks to Nitsan, to Ryan, and to Gohar to joining us on this show. We're going to be back, remember, next week when we've got the big reveal part 2, when we're going to say who is the person who had the most nominations, who topped the poll as the most admired global mobility professional in the world. So do make sure that you join us next week. And then the week after, we've got cybersecurity part 2, when we're going to be talking about solutions. So this week we're identifying problems, and next week we're going to start identifying the solution. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to the audience. And all that it remains for me to do is say goodbye to everybody. Take care and have a good week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.